What happens when a man who went from sleeping in his car to becoming one of the most successful entertainers in America sits down across from a host who thinks she can tear him apart with clever insults, only to discover that some people have been through too much to be intimidated by words? What you're about to witness is one of the most satisfying confrontations ever captured on daytime television. The moment when Steve Harvey, the man who built an empire on making people laugh, turned the tables so completely that his attacker had no choice but to flee the battlefield. The studio went silent. The audience held their breath. And then something happened that had never happened before in the history of The View. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to subscribe and drop your thoughts in the comments because, trust me, you're going to want to talk about this one. The morning had started with the usual energy at the View Studios. Steve Harvey was coming on the show to promote his latest venture, and everyone expected the interview to be entertaining. Steve had a way of lighting up any room he walked into, a natural charisma that had taken him from struggling stand-up comedian to media mogul with a portfolio that included television shows, books, and a radio empire that reached millions of listeners every day. Steve arrived at the studio dressed impeccably in one of his signature suits, his famous mustache perfectly groomed, his smile already warming up the production staff before the cameras even started rolling. At 67 years old, he had achieved a level of success that most people could only dream of, but he had never lost the common touch that made him relatable to audiences across every demographic. In the green room, his team reviewed the talking points, but Steve waved them off with a laugh. He had been doing interviews for 30 years. He didn't need preparation. What he needed was to be himself, because that authenticity was what had gotten him this far. What nobody anticipated was that Joy Behar had arrived at the studio that morning, determined to knock him off his pedestal. Behind the scenes, sources would later reveal that Joy had been making dismissive comments about Steve for weeks. She found his self-help advice simplistic, she said, his relationship books condescending, his whole folksy down-home persona felt calculated to her, a carefully constructed image designed to appeal to people she considered unsophisticated. Today she had decided she was going to expose what she saw as the real Steve Harvey beneath the polished surface. The studio lights were bright as Steve took his seat at the famous table. He greeted each host with genuine warmth, his booming voice filling the space with infectious energy. The audience gave him an enthusiastic welcome, many of them regular viewers of Family Feud, who had come specifically to see him in person. Whoopi Goldberg opened the segment with obvious affection. Our next guest is a man who does it all: television host, comedian, author, radio personality, and, according to my sources, the owner of more suits than any man should legally possess. Please welcome Steve Harvey. The applause was warm and sustained. Steve stood up briefly to acknowledge the audience, turning in a circle with his arms spread wide, showing off his perfectly tailored navy blue suit. What can I say? A man's gotta look good. That's the first rule of success right there. The audience laughed appreciatively. This was the Steve Harvey they had come to see, confident and charming and endlessly entertaining. Sarah Haynes asked about his latest project, and Steve launched into an engaging description that had the audience hanging on every word. "You know what I've learned after all these years?" Steve said, leaning back with the ease of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. "Success isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about being the hardest working. It's about getting up every time life knocks you down. And let me tell you, life knocked me down plenty before I figured that out." The audience nodded along, connecting with his message. For a few minutes, everything felt exactly as it should. Then Joy Behar leaned forward with that familiar predatory glint in her eyes, and the energy in the room shifted noticeably. "So, Steve," Joy began, her voice carrying an edge that made the other hosts exchange nervous glances. "You talk a lot about success and hard work, but let's be honest here. A lot of your success has come from telling people, especially women, how to live their lives. Your book, Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man, was basically a manual for how women should behave to catch a man. Don't you think that's a little condescending? A man telling women what they're doing wrong?" The question was clearly designed to put Steve on the defensive. Several audience members shifted uncomfortably. But Steve's expression didn't change. If anything, his smile got a little wider. "Well, Joy, that book sold over 3 million copies, Steve replied, his voice carrying the easy confidence of someone who had heard this criticism before. "So, Apparently, a few women found it helpful. But I understand your concern. It must be frustrating to see someone give advice that actually works when you've been giving advice on this show for years, and the divorce rate hasn't budged. The counterpunch landed with precision. The audience let out a collective gasp that quickly turned into laughter. Joy's expression flickered with surprise, but she recovered quickly. That's cute, Steve. But let's talk about your own track record with relationships. You've been married 3 times. 3 times. Don't you think there's something a little hypocritical about a man who couldn't make 2 marriages work writing books about how to have successful relationships? Steve nodded slowly, completely unfazed by the attack. You're absolutely right, Joy. I've been married 3 times. You know why? Because I kept trying until I got it right. That's what winners do. They don't give up after one failure. They learn from their mistakes and try again. My 3rd marriage has been going strong for almost 20 years now. How long have your marriages lasted? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Joy's face flushed slightly. We're not talking about me. We're talking about you. Oh, I see, Steve said, leaning forward with a knowing smile. So, you can dig into my personal life, but yours is off limits. That's an interesting standard for journalism, Joy. Do they teach that in the handbook, or is that something you came up with yourself? The audience laughed again, louder this time. They were beginning to sense that this wasn't going to go the way Joy had planned. Sunny Hostin was trying to hide a smile behind her hand. Even Whoopi looked like she was enjoying watching Joy get a taste of her own medicine. Joy tried to regain control of the conversation. Look, I'm just pointing out that you've built a career on giving advice about things you're not exactly an expert in. Relationship advice from someone who failed at marriage twice. Life advice from someone who admits he barely finished high school. Don't you think people deserve better credentials from their gurus? Steve's expression didn't waver, but something in his eyes sharpened. Barely finished high school? Joy? I grew up in Cleveland in a working-class family. I didn't have the luxury of going to fancy schools. But let me tell you what I did have. I had hunger. I had determination. I had the willingness to fail over and over again until I succeeded. He paused, his voice dropping to something more serious. You want to talk about credentials? My credentials are sleeping in my car for 3 years, while I tried to make it as a comedian. My credentials are performing in clubs where people threw things at me because I wasn't funny yet. My credentials are being so broke that I had to choose between eating and putting gas in my car. Those are my credentials, Joy. The School of Hard Knocks. And that degree is worth more than any piece of paper hanging on a wall. The audience erupted in applause. Steve had turned her attack into a triumph, using his humble beginnings as proof of his authenticity rather than something to be ashamed of. Joy's face had gone red, but she wasn't ready to give up. That's a lovely story, Steve. Very inspirational. But let's talk about something more recent. The Miss Universe incident. You announced the wrong winner on live television in front of millions of people. You humiliated that poor woman, and then you somehow turned your massive failure into more fame. Don't you think there's something wrong with a culture that rewards incompetence? The mention of Miss Universe made several people in the audience wince. It was the moment that should have ended careers, the kind of public failure that most people never recovered from. But Steve just smiled, a wide, genuine smile that seemed to fill the entire studio. Joy, I'm so glad you brought that up. That was the worst moment of my professional life. I made a mistake that was seen by hundreds of millions of people around the world. And you know what I did? I apologized. I took responsibility. I didn't make excuses or blame anyone else. I stood there on that stage and I owned my failure completely. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on Joy's face. Now, let me ask you something. When was the last time you apologized for anything on this show? When was the last time you said something wrong, hurt someone's feelings, made a mistake, and actually took responsibility for it? Because I watch this show sometimes, and I see a lot of opinions being thrown around, but I don't see a lot of accountability when those opinions turn out to be wrong. The question hit its mark with devastating precision. Joy's mouth opened and closed without any sound coming out. The audience was completely silent, sensing that something significant was happening. The difference between you and me, Joy, Steve continued, his voice calm but carrying an edge that cut through the studio, is that I know I'm imperfect, I know I make mistakes, and I'm not afraid to admit it. But you sit at this table every day acting like your opinions are facts, like your perspective is the only valid one, like anyone who disagrees with you is somehow less intelligent or less worthy of respect. He shook his head slowly. That's not journalism. That's not even good conversation. That's just ego dressed up as expertise. And the really sad part is, you've been doing it so long that you probably don't even realize you're doing it anymore. The observation was so accurate that Joy seemed physically affected by it. Her usual confident posture had deflated slightly, and her voice was strained when she finally responded. I think you're being oversensitive to legitimate criticism, Joy managed, but the words lacked their usual conviction. Steve laughed, a genuine, warm laugh that seemed to diffuse some of the tension, while simultaneously highlighting how ridiculous her response was. Oversensitive? Joy, I just told you I slept in my car for 3 years. I've been heckled by drunks in comedy clubs. I've been rejected by every network in television before I finally got a chance. I've been called every name you can imagine by people who didn't think a black man from Cleveland had any business being successful. You think a few questions from you are gonna make me oversensitive? He spread his hands wide, still smiling. Baby, I've been through too much to be bothered by someone who thinks their opinion is the most important thing in the room. I've faced real adversity, real struggle, real failure, and I'm still here, still smiling, still succeeding. So, with all due respect, you're going to have to try a lot harder than that if you want to rattle me. The audience burst into applause. Steve had not only deflected every attack, but had somehow managed to do it while remaining likable and even charming. Joy, by contrast, was looking increasingly uncomfortable. Sarah Haynes tried to redirect the conversation. Maybe we should talk about Family Feud and the incredible run you've had with that show. But Joy wasn't ready to surrender. Actually, I have one more question. Steve, you've made a lot of comments over the years about your faith, about God's plan for your life. But you've also said some things that many people found offensive. You said that atheists don't have a moral barometer. You've made comments about other religions that weren't exactly tolerant. How do you reconcile being a man of faith with being a man who says intolerant things? The question was clearly designed to be a knockout blow, bringing up controversial statements that had gotten Steve in trouble before. But Steve didn't flinch. Joy, I'm a Christian. I believe what I believe. And yes, I've said things in the past that I've had to clarify or apologize for because I'm human and I'm still learning and growing. But here's what I find interesting. You're questioning my tolerance while sitting at a table where you've made intolerant comments about people of faith for years. He tilted his head slightly, his expression one of genuine curiosity. You've mocked Christians. You've dismissed religious people as backwards or ignorant. You've made fun of beliefs that millions of Americans hold sacred. So, before you come at me about intolerance, maybe you should look at the glass house you're sitting in. Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty fragile. Joy's face had gone from red to almost purple. That's not the same thing at all. I question beliefs. I don't attack people. Don't you, though? Steve's voice was gentle, but his words were sharp. Because it sure feels like an attack when you question someone's credentials, their marriages, their education, their faith, all in the span of 10 minutes. It feels like an attack when you bring up the worst moment of someone's career, specifically to humiliate them. It feels like an attack when you suggest that someone doesn't deserve their success because they didn't take the path you think they should have taken. He paused, letting his words sink in. I came on this show to have a conversation, to promote something I'm proud of, to maybe make people laugh and think. But you had a different agenda. You wanted to tear me down. You wanted to prove that you're smarter than me, better than me, more sophisticated than me. And the really funny part is, in trying to prove all that, you've actually proven the opposite. The studio was absolutely silent. Joy looked like she had been slapped. What's that supposed to mean? She demanded, but her voice was shaking. Steve's smile was kind, almost sympathetic, which somehow made his words land even harder. It means that truly confident people don't need to tear others down to feel good about themselves. It means that truly intelligent people can disagree without being disagreeable. It means that truly sophisticated people know how to treat guests with basic respect, even when they don't share their views. He leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed. You've spent this entire interview trying to make me look bad, but all you've really done is show everyone watching what kind of person you are when you think you have the upper hand. And I've got to tell you, Joy, it's not a good look. It's not a good look at all. The audience began to applaud again, and this time it didn't stop. People were standing up, some were cheering. Joy looked around the studio with an expression of barely concealed panic, realizing that she had completely lost control of the situation. "This is ridiculous," Joy said, her voice rising. "I asked legitimate questions and you've turned this into some kind of personal attack on me." Steve shook his head slowly, still smiling, that infuriating, serene smile. "No, Joy. You turned this into a personal attack when you questioned my marriages, my education, my faith, and my right to give advice. I just responded in kind. The difference is, I did it with facts and humor instead of sneering condescension. That's the difference between someone who grew up having to win people over and someone who grew up thinking their opinion was all that mattered." Joy stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I don't have to sit here and be insulted by a game show host," she snapped, her voice trembling with anger and humiliation. "Actually, Joy, that's exactly what you do for a living," Steve replied calmly. "You sit there and insult people every single day. The only difference is, today someone insulted you back, and apparently you can dish it out, but you can't take it." The audience erupted. It was the kind of response that would be replayed millions of times, shared across every social media platform, quoted in articles about the most savage moments in television history. Joy stood frozen for a moment, her face a mask of fury and embarrassment. Then, without another word, she turned and walked off the set. The audience gasped, then cheered even louder. The remaining hosts sat in stunned silence, clearly unsure how to process what they had just witnessed. Whoopi finally found her voice. "Well, I think we need to take a commercial break." But Steve held up his hand gently. "Before you do that, Whoopi, I just want to say something." He turned to address the audience directly, and the cameras captured the full weight of his presence, the same presence that had made him a star. "I didn't come here to fight with anyone. I didn't come here to embarrass Joy or to prove anything about myself. I came here to have a conversation. But when someone comes at you with disrespect, you have two choices. You can let them walk all over you, or you can stand up for yourself with dignity. I chose dignity." His voice softened slightly. "I've been blessed beyond measure in my life. I've gone from having nothing to having everything I ever dreamed of. And along the way, I learned that you teach people how to treat you. If you let them disrespect you, they'll keep doing it. If you show them that you respect yourself, most of them will respect you too. And the ones who don't, well, they usually end up walking off sets." The audience laughed warmly, and Steve smiled that famous smile. "Now, I believe you wanted to ask me about Family Feud, Sarah." The show continued somehow, with Steve charming the remaining hosts and the audience as if nothing unusual had happened. He talked about his show, his family, his upcoming projects. He was funny and warm and exactly as likable as he had been before Joy tried to tear him down. But everyone in that studio knew they had witnessed something historic. For the first time in the show's long history, a guest had so thoroughly defeated a host that the host had been forced to retreat in humiliation, not through anger or cruelty, but through wit, wisdom, and an unshakable confidence that came from having survived worse than anything a talk show host could throw at him. And as the credits rolled and the audience filed out, still buzzing about what they had seen, one thing was absolutely clear. Steve Harvey had walked into The View as a guest and walked out as a legend. Not because he had been mean or vindictive, but because he had shown everyone watching exactly how to handle a bully, with humor, with grace, and with the quiet certainty of a man who knows exactly who he is and isn't afraid to defend it. The aftermath of that interview would dominate social media for days. Clips of Steve's devastating comebacks would be shared millions of times. Joy's walk-off would become a meme, a symbol of what happens when someone who is used to attacking others finally meets someone who refuses to be a victim. Think pieces would be written about the moment, analyzing what it revealed about celebrity interviews, about power dynamics, about the difference between confidence and arrogance. But perhaps the most significant outcome was the conversation it started about how we treat each other in public discourse. Steve had demonstrated that it was possible to defend yourself without losing your dignity, to win an argument without destroying your opponent, to stand up for yourself while still remaining fundamentally decent. In a media landscape that often rewarded cruelty and outrage, he had shown that kindness and wit could be even more powerful weapons. What do you think about this incredible confrontation? Did Steve Harvey handle Joy Behar perfectly, or did he go too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more stories that will absolutely leave you speechless.